Ladies and gentlemen, we have just entered the 45th month of Russian full-scale war in Ukraine. For 45 months, Ukrainians have been fighting not only for their homeland, safety and security, but they have been fighting for the freedom, security, prosperity of the whole Europe. My name is Sintija Broka-Kovalevska. I am senior researcher at the Analytics and Advisory Group PowerHouse Latvia, also a fellow at the Latvian Institute of International Affairs, and I'm very delighted to greet you from this Riga Security Forum 2025 podcast studio here in Riga. Today, we are going to discuss various important questions. Is Europe ready for Ukraine? At the same time, can Ukraine continue to support Europe much longer? All between the lines, we also have a question, is Ukraine ready for Europe at the end of the day? And to explore those issues, I am joined by two excellent guests and experts. Here with me in studio in person is Ambassador Juris Poikāns, who has extensive experience in foreign service, and currently he serves as a special envoy for Ukraine at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Latvia. Welcome and thank you for joining, Ambassador.
Good afternoon.
And joining us remotely is my good friend and colleague, Mrs. Elizabete Elīna Vizgunova-Vikmane, long-standing researcher and policy analyst, currently is based in Kiev as a civilian expert and is also a research fellow at the Latvian Institute of International Affairs. Welcome, Elizabete, and thank you for joining. Thank you both for joining, for finding a time to discuss those issues. It's been 45 months. It's been long time since we are discussing Ukraine's path towards Europe, what it means for European security. But at the end of the day, again, we are sitting here in Riga today discussing what it means for Europe, what it means for Ukraine itself. So to kicking it off, when I ask, is Europe ready for Ukraine? What you take out from that, Ambassador, what the readiness means for you, what the European readiness is it political slogan? Is it, bureaucratic slogan? What it is that you take from that?
I think if you look at Europe, or at least at the majority of European states and citizens, I think there is a clear understanding that the outcome of this war clearly is very much connected to the future of Europe. If simply saying Ukraine fails, we find ourselves in a completely new geopolitical situation. We have new geopolitical challenges. Let's remember what President Kaczynski said in Georgia in 2008. At that time when he spoke that now it's Georgia, then it will be Ukraine. Now, at that time, it looked maybe a bit over-exaggeration, but now looking, if let's say Ukraine fails, obviously we might speculate who is the next target. So there is clear understanding from my point of view in Europe that Ukraine is important. That's why there is support for Ukraine. We see that Europe is also arming, which is clearly manifested also by decisions of NATO Hague Summit. So there is understanding. There is danger, there is threat. This is one part of the coin. And the second part of the coin, I think, when you ask, is Europe ready? I believe there is understanding if the war ends, but the war ends, let's say, without a clear result, if there are no clear security guarantees for Ukraine. And here, let's not talk about whether Ukraine gets into NATO or not. There might be another security guarantees at the same time, but there should be some of them. If Ukraine, for example, signs some kind of armistice treaty at one point, there are no clear security guarantees. It might be an invitation for another invasion, let's say, on behalf of Russia. And if you look historically, the 18th century, from my point of view, is a good example of what happened with Poland. You had the first division of Poland, Poland was weakened, so it tried somehow to break this circle of encirclement, but didn't succeed. It ended up with the loss of sovereignty. So as a result, I believe Europeans understand you need to have some kind of security guarantees. And if you want to guarantee stability in this part of Europe, actually membership of Ukraine in the European Union in a way is a must. It's not a question about some kind of a privilege, but you need stability in this part of Europe in order to avoid instability.
Okay, so the role of European Union and the role of NATO coming down to the Europe's readiness. Elizabete, what you take from that, what Ambassador said, and adding your own thoughts on this.
Thank you very much, Sintija. Thank you, Ambassador. I can only agree with your assessment. I think Europe understands that Ukraine is too big to fail. This is our ultimate credibility test as Europeans. We must integrate Europe. And this, of course, will come at a very significant cost to us, as we see now. I think if there is something that still needs to be understood, it is that Ukraine has a very complex history. It is a very big, difficult society, which is largely divided in three parts. There is one part which is highly socialized with the European Union. They have been exposed to European values and they know what is the European way of life. And these are the people that are pushing the reforms, the big reformers. But then, of course, there is still a part of society which suffers from something I'm not afraid to even name a post-Soviet syndrome, which requires a lot of work from our side. And this is not work that we will be able to do in 5 years. This is not work we will be able to complete in 10 years. This is probably something that will take our energy and our resources for another generation. And therefore, we all have to sort of put a mental note. Europe is now in a very long-standing engagement with Ukraine. But of course, it will determine our future. It will make or break us.
If you mentioned long-standing, how much time you think Europe will need?
I don't have a precise prognosis, and I would in general abstain from these numbers that keep being thrown around. We will join the European Union in 5 years. We'll be able to integrate Ukraine in 10 years. The EU accession is a complete deal. Either you complete all the requirements or you don't, right? There is no half accession, which means that Ukraine, even though it has received preferential treatment, and rightly so, they are now in a battle for our own security, will still have to do a lot of work. And this will depend on the willingness of the Ukrainian government to comply with the European Union acquis. There are clear, concrete rules that are put down in the roadmap for EU's integration, and the Ukrainian government has the list of the tasks. Now it comes down to implementing them.
Okay, and we know what the list means very well, according to our own experience. You mentioned the division among Ukrainian society. That is not very monolithic society. Still, perceptions and history plays part in understanding whether they believe in post-Soviet sphere of influence, as you mentioned, or still in European family. But thinking about the role from outside of Ukraine's role, so we have. Ukraine is a defender of our security, European borderline, Eastern European borderline with Russia. At the same time, we have these aspiration tendencies within the Ukrainian society to become EU member. So, counting in your experience on the ground and what you just said, how would you address, Elizabete, the question, is Ukraine ready for Europe?
I would say overall, there is a very high society support for EU accession. 74%, according to the most recent polls, support EU's accession. So there's a clear willingness to be a part of that club because Ukrainians see, firstly, a better future for their children. They also see the EU as a space for economic opportunities, for easier travel. And essentially, they also see their membership of the EU as partially a security guarantee. And this is important. They therefore see the EU as a geopolitical player and the only one that can counteract the unfriendly neighbor. From the other hand side, Ukrainians are also, they believe they are highly aware of the requirements they have to fulfill in order to join the European Union. And this also shows in their list of priorities. They believe that by joining the European Union, they will firstly be able to tackle the corruption in Ukraine, which is prevalent and sometimes is named as a number one challenge to the Ukrainian society, even higher than the current war. Secondly, they believe that joining the European Union will actually give them a better rule of law framework and therefore allow the general prosecutor and other law agencies to comply with the European norms. And this is important. At the same time, we also have to understand that Ukraine still largely operates as a society which has patronal, or in other words, oligarchic structures. So there are numerous special interests that run the society of Ukraine. And this also means that a large part of their economy is still in the gray sector. They're very gray sector. There are different estimates between 14 and 40%. And it's hard to say, especially because of the war, it's hard to track. which number we're actually talking about, but this means that a sizable part of society still operates in this sector. So this is the societal side, and then on the governmental level, of course, we see that there is progress made in order to comply with the European Union acquis. There is progress regarding the reform of all agencies in Ukraine, including the law enforcement agencies. But here I see a particular challenge, especially now, as we see a lot of centralization of power, firstly in the hands of the office of the president, and secondly, the hands of the security institutions, especially the State Security Office of Ukraine. Now, this State Security Bureau, in fact, sees itself as the primary security institution in Ukraine. It's characterized by a more KGB style of thinking. It has indeed a lot of sort of paranoia, and it doesn't even abstain from using intimidation towards the civil society agencies. So having all this in mind, and as I said before, we need to understand that there are different Ukraines we're talking about. There are reformers, and then there are those that are keeping Ukraine in its sort of being stuck in the reform process, almost simulating some of the reforms. So the EU now must realize this and must really put a lot of pressure on Ukraine through conditionality, as accepted in pre-accession context, in order to proceed with the reforms.
Okay, thank you very much. Coming to Ambassador, what would be your explanation or answer to the question, also from what Elizabete just said? Is Ukraine ready for Europe? Counting in that there might be various Ukraines, but still there is one that we as Latvians, as we as EU support. So where do we stand?
Agreeing to Elizabete, I would even complicate a bit the situation even more in a way. At first, I believe one very big problem Ukraine is facing, it's that it has very weak statehood traditions. Ukraine has existed historically, let's say for a long time, but it's lacking statehood traditions, as it has been in a way encircled on the one hand by central and western part of Europe, let's say namely Poland. On the other hand, it has been Russia, in the south Crimean Tatars. As a result, it has been endless struggle for finding their own identity. Let's say, if you look at the beginning of 90s, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, we decided already in 1995, our foreign policy concept stated that we want to become a part of the European Union, NATO. So we made this foreign policy choice. While in case of Ukraine, and Elizabete here described, different regions, different mentalities. If you take Lviv in the west, Kharkiv in the east, it was extremely difficult to agree where to go and how to go. So it was some kind of a, let's say, decisions that you will balance between east and west. And as we see, this policy failed. Gradually, step by step, Ukraine is now choosing its path to the west. But what Elizabete already brilliantly described, in every region and in different, let's say, segments of the society, this understanding moving towards Europe obviously is perceived differently. It's much easier in the western part of Ukraine, which has these historical European traditions. It's much more difficult in the east. Obviously, the war, unfortunately, it helps to build this Ukrainian identity. So it's about building the Ukrainian statehood. So you need to have this strategic understanding, which obviously the political elite has, but it doesn't mean that always the population has. Yes, 74% support moving towards Europe. So it seems you have at this momentum consensus, both in the political elite and within the society. What does it mean practically? If you think about adopting EU acquis, 100,000 pages of all these documents, I believe for a very big part of Ukrainians, it's extremely difficult to understand. I believe this perception about coming closer to Europe is perceived very much emotionally. We are suffering, we have made a choice, and here we come to the point what Elizabete mentioned here, you need to do a lot of practical changes. The fight against corruption, securing foreign investors' rights, securing ownership rights in general, things which we did already, let's say, not perfectly, but we did before entering the European Union. So I believe Ukraine is ready to move towards Europe, but I think what is missing a bit, it's understanding that it might take for, let's say, decades. I believe this is missing.
And just to speculating, what if Ukraine fails? Or what if those changes and understanding within the society takes much more time than Europe or Baltic states are ready to actually locate?
I think the first is to achieve peace. This is the first. I believe for every Ukrainian nowadays, the key question will be, let's say, we need peace and stability to move on. Let's say this soldier who is currently fighting, defending Ukraine, obviously he expects some signals coming from Europe that you are at least welcome. But at this moment, from my point of view, the key priority for every Ukrainian is to achieve just peace. I believe nowadays, even people politically, obviously, we support the restoration of territorial integrity, but I believe for many Ukrainians, the key is peace, stability, and security, so which would provide some kind of stable foundation to move forward. So in order not to fail, number one is to achieve that. The second step is, from my point of view, when you asked also, Elizabete, how many years we will need? From my point of view, this is a question no one will be able to reply. But what we really need to do, we must at least start these accession negotiations. It's not a question about 5, 7, 10 years. When Ukraine will be put firmly on the track, when they will know what should be adopted, and then the European Union also will decide whether Ukraine has really implemented, let's say, legislation, has put it into practice, I believe then you must start at least the process. So from my point of view, I don't see Ukraine failing, but really it can take many years.
Mm-hmm. Elizabete, you want to add something?
If I can, perhaps I want to come in here. The question of whether Ukraine fails, I think we have to qualify that. So militarily, I think it's clear. We are looking towards more a stalemate, some frozen conflict. It depends on how the conflict will be solved, but Ukraine cannot cede that much more territory to Ukraine, considering the current disposition in the frontline regions. Now, secondly, when it comes to Europeanization, this is also, as I mentioned, a matter of what the Ukrainian government chooses to do. But here, the important part in the post-ceasefire or post-war context. Because during the war, there only so much can be done. The government has highly centralized the power. And of course, it is clear that while the martial law is on, they cannot really decentralize it that much. So there is a certain agreement between the society and the government, a social agreement that the society agrees to the centralized power type of governance until a ceasefire or a resolution, a stable and lasting resolution to the conflict is achieved. And there we face the big challenges. Just looking at the example of the Balkan Wars, we saw so many challenges to the rule of law that were now spilling out in Europe. The trafficking of small arms and light weapons, the high numbers of veterans that have been injured by the war and indeed are facing a psychological crisis. Thirdly, we can also expect Russian subversive activities in the territory of Ukraine because however the war ends, I believe we as Latvians know very well, it will not end at that point. It will only end if Russia at some day falls apart because this country has a particular long-standing strategy in its near neighborhood and it will never let go of Ukraine. I don't see that kind of revolutionary change coming to Russia. Therefore, so the big challenges lie ahead. And actually, that is the time we will see what will happen to Ukraine. Will they succeed? And that is all a guessing game at this point.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. And understanding, Russia very well and understanding what it will mean in a long-term period, those are us here in Baltic states who understand that. Some European partners, but we see very well how hard work our diplomats is doing in order to convince the wider society that Russia is a threat and we should be able to prepare. And therefore, I would like to move forward on Baltic security in a perspective of transatlantic security architecture, we could say. We know that the position of the United States and President Trump is different, is changing by weeks, from diplomacy to very strict sanctions. We see that also Europe in diplomatic level is very much willing to support Ukraine as much as is possible, but at the same time, in military terms and military capacities, we are very much restricted. And we understand here in Baltic states and Latvia very well that obviously Ukrainian resistance, resilience also is our front line when it comes to defense and security borders. And at the same time, Ukrainians are buying us time to strengthen our own capabilities. Now we are going to reach the highest GDP of defense in the history of our state, right? So we need that time to prepare ourselves for what comes next. So what would be your perceptions? Where do we stand? From one hand, there is a willingness and need to maintain just peace and to stop the war on the ground, and then all the accession process can start, and it can take, years. It doesn't matter, as you mentioned, but at the same time, we need time to prepare ourselves because our preparedness is not still there. So what the general audience could make out of it? What is in our interests, in Latvian interests, probably, Ambassador?
I think it's in the Latvian interest, obviously, is the first is to get just peace for Ukraine. This is very important because having lost at this moment geopolitically Belarus, we cannot allow to lose also Ukraine. So the first is we need Ukraine. The second is I believe our government will accept any peace deal which will be accepted by the Ukrainian government. And this has been our point from the very beginning. We cannot impose, let's say, any peace settlement on the Ukrainian government if it's not happy with that. Given, let's say, the revolutionary traditions in Ukraine, we know when there is a perception that something has gone wrong. So we need the agreement which is accepted by the Ukrainian government, and it means at the same time also by the Ukrainian society. So at this particular moment, obviously, we must try to provide everything what we can for Ukraine. And when it comes, let's say, to the Baltic governments, to Nordic governments, even with the change of government in Poland, Czech Republic, we see this support, and also including Germany, France, UK, as much as possible. So there is support because Ukraine needs both military and financial. So there is understanding that we must support it. You rightly pointed out it's extremely difficult in this situation that Elizabete also mentioned, in the specific domestic political environment to implement reforms when you have martial law, you have in a way, let's say, limited TV coverage of activities. In Ukraine is a very democratic country. Let's say before the full-scale invasion, you have a lot of TV shows, a lot of different TV channels. Nowadays, everything is very much limited. Let's say the political life is also limited at the same time. So without achieving peace settlement, it will be extremely difficult to move on. But I would concentrate at first is supporting Ukraine at this historical moment. The second is what the European Union should decide how we overcome, let's say, the concerns and worries of our Hungarian friends who are at this moment effectively blocking, unfortunately, the start of accession negotiations. And here, from my point of view, Ukrainians can do very little. Because as we have seen, on many occasions, Ukrainian government, its officials have talked to the Hungarian officials in Transcarpathia and also in Budapest. It has not worked. So this is our aim in general to overcome that. Because at this moment, what probably would help Ukrainians, at least a clear political signal that they are welcome. I believe, I would define very, let's say, concrete steps what can be achieved specifically at this moment. Let's be realistic. We look how the enlargement in general takes place in the European Union accession negotiations. We have some more positive examples. It's Montenegro, it's maybe Albania, but not very positive with regard to other states. So as a result, even there is a feeling that this is political impetus for, let's say, facilitating accession negotiations, but the actual progress is rather slow. So it's more at this moment, from my point of view, sending political signals to the Ukrainians that you are welcome in the European Union. Again, trying to avoid the exact date when they would join the European Union.
Elizabete, clear political signals from Baltic states, from Europe. Is this enough, or what Kiev needs more from us in 2005, remaining 25, 26?
So I will give you an interesting anecdote that I come across every time I reply to somebody's question, where are you from, that I'm a Latvian. They immediately smile and they tell me, thank you for all your support. And then I tell them, I'm sorry, we don't have so many means to give you. We've given you all we got. And we've given you more sometimes. We've given you all the support in international scene. And then they tell me, that is exactly what we need. We need your encouragement and your support. And this is one of the first times in my life when myself as a millennial come across a country where everybody tells me how great, how wonderful you're from Latvia. They admire us, they admire our spirit and our strength. And believe me, Ukrainians, I could say, are suckers for public diplomacy. And we are indeed succeeding in that aspect. We have an extremely positive perception among the European Union member states. our public image is even better than Germany's, that are perhaps in total sum have given more money to Ukrainians. But because we are leading with our relative amount compared to our GDP, they see our efforts. So that's the first thing. The second thing, and this is more another question of our external communication, but with our European partners, at this point in time, this is a consensus. Whatever happens with the anti-corruption or the rule of law questions in Ukraine, if we see a backsliding, luckily, we don't see it for now, but if this comes in the future, it is our duty to make sure operational support to Ukraine continues, no matter what happens. This must be priority. So the accession and the military support, as it is decoupled now, it must stay decoupled in the future. Ukraine has to push on in its military fight. And thirdly, I believe it is also up to us to continue messaging as we do. Firstly, that this is an imperial war of Russia. And I think this is something that we have communicated extremely clear, because by now it seems true, but just 2 years ago, this was framed in all kinds of ways. Conflict in Ukraine, the Russo-Ukrainian conflict. We saw this kind of framing. Nowadays, it's not normal anymore. It is quite clear that people say this is a Russian aggression towards Ukraine, which is fairly framed as a victim. This is one big part of achieving international justice and also a worldview which is beneficial to us as a state. And secondly, we have to propel the strategic thinking of the EU. It is clear that it wasn't prepared for this crisis. It has taken a major toll on the EU decision-making. It has exposed all kinds of weaknesses, including those that Ambassador was talking about with our internal problems with Hungary, with Slovakia, and other internal spoilers. So, the strategic thinking for the years ahead. What will the European Union be in the big geopolitical chessboard in 2030-35? This is our big question that we still as members have to address ourselves.
Okay, so internal discussions, developments within the European Union when it comes to solidarity and help to Ukraine, but still there are other actors such as the United States that I briefly mentioned. Elizabete, do you think that our efforts, everything that you mentioned, can reach the ears of President Trump and his administration? And can Europe do more in that regard as well?
So, it is clear that after the withdrawal of the United States, after the beginning of the first Trump presidency, the EU did to an extent step up its efforts. It's especially seen when it comes to military expenditure. Overall, it's been relatively constant and the same. But the question is the sort of fatigue that the European Union countries are experiencing and the populations are experiencing. This is very much interlinked with internal political developments, far-right parties, election cycles, etc. Now, a few things I want to say. Some countries, including Denmark, including the Netherlands, are actually showing pretty healthy results in certain polls. One of them was conducted by Eurofund. So a large part of society, over a half, are ready to continue their efforts to support Ukraine until the end of the war, which means they are willing to do as much as it takes for as long as it takes to support Ukraine. As long as the governments have the population backing, we can be pretty sure that they will go ahead with the support to Ukraine. But there are other countries. One of them is Spain, Italy, and also France, where less than half of population are ready to support Ukraine till the end of the war, and they're rather willing to accept negotiated peace. Which means, of course, that in this situation, all of Ukrainian demands may not be taken into the consideration. And I think looking at these data, we can then assess and consider to what extent there is some fatigue. At the same time, I think, as I mentioned, the Western support is mostly impacted by the lack of sort of the concrete proposals for lasting peace. At this point in time, all kinds of options have been thrown around. There's a US peace resolution scenario. There's a Russian plan, which is, of course, unacceptable to Ukrainians. There is a Ukrainian plan, which is unfortunately unacceptable to the Russians. And then there is an EU peace plan, which is also not agreed in a consensus. So we really should take leadership in this as Europeans, and I believe it is up to us to step up. Unfortunately, as we have seen in the last year, most of the peace negotiations have been taken on by the US and Russia without Ukraine's participation. And this is a very dangerous trend because it shows that the big dominant players are now making decisions on on the future of the smaller ones. So that would probably be it for me, but I think there are a few things. There is a certain fatigue, and then there's a lack of leadership, and these two are quite toxic traits that we see in the international scene.
The role of United States ambassador, also from Baltic perspective.
I will add something what Elizabete made here, a lot of interesting points. I will start the first about Latvia's contribution. We have counted in the ministries that Latvia's support, military and civilian, is around 1 billion euros. So it means if you, let's say, transform it in Poland, it would be 20 billion euros. So as a result, it's really very much substantial. I will come to the United States, but the second point, the European Union. Obviously, one of the biggest problems when it comes, be it Ukraine, be it Middle East, be it the United States, we are still 27 countries. Yes, we have Ms. Kallas, who is responsible for EU foreign policy, we have External Action Service, but we still have national prejudices, national stereotypes, national interests, and it goes on. Obviously, for those countries which are closer to Ukraine, geographically, like for the Baltics, Nordics, Poland, this is much more existential, according, let's say, to their or our perceptions, and let's say for countries of Southern Europe. And these figures mentioned, let's say, what people in France, Italy, Spain think. Yes, I have heard something similar in Warsaw when the European Council of Foreign Relations made a big research. So this is one of our tasks of those countries which are heavily supporting. And here Nordics are really important. United Kingdom is important. Canada is important. It's working with these, I would call so-called skeptical countries, not even skeptical countries, but those who probably are not so much engaged. Because this is, unfortunately, the essence of the European Union, that we are very much divided. When it comes to the United States, President Trump wants peace. He has stated it many, many times. But as a result, let's say it's already half a year has passed, so he is having his own methods and understanding how to achieve its peace. And obviously, looking from the European perspective, these steps are not always understood. But what is probably visible during the last, let's say, month, there is growing understanding also when it comes to President Trump that, let's say, his talks with President Putin in Alaska didn't work well, because if the person in this moment, President Trump, has some kind of idea, he wants to achieve peace, and he sees that the other party is really blocking all these efforts, his understanding gradually is coming closer towards ours. But as you said it at the very beginning, you have one opinion 1 week, another week. As a result, so and this is what European leaders are doing constantly. President Stubb, for example, the Finnish president, or other European leaders who are traveling to Washington, trying to explain what is all this about, showing the European contribution. And from my point of view, these decisions in The Hague to strengthen our defenses is, in a way, also indirect effect, showing that we are very much serious about putting all these plans, what Elizabete is saying, on the tables, that we are ready to be, let's say, some kind of guarantors of the security, let's say, after the end of the war. At this moment, for example, it works very well with this PURL initiative, where, let's say, Europeans are buying American weaponry and transferring it later to Ukraine. So we must search for ways, and we are doing that, how to engage President Trump and his administration. So if we compare the situation with a half a year ago, from my point of view, the situation is definitely better.
But just a little bit, I want to speculate here. Do you really believe that we can achieve, Ambassador, that goes to you, are we really able to achieve a just peace in Ukraine without American support? And what Baltic states would do if that peace wouldn't be just?
I think at first the American support is there. So we have found the model. Let's say it's a different model than with the administration of President Biden, but there is a model which actually works. So we see it, and we see, let's say, also constant political dialogue between President Trump, President Zelensky. So we have also minerals agreement signed between the two administrations. So
we remember how challenging that part was.
Understand. That's why I mentioned we are in much better situations than half a year ago. Obviously, let's say the new American administration, when it is tackling different foreign policy issues, they have their own approach. So usually all these conflicts or wars, they are much more complex than they look at the very beginning. And this is the European role, in a way, where we try to explain permanently what is all this about. So from my point of view, so we have found the model of some kind of, let's say, supporting Ukraine between Americans and then Europeans. When it comes to the actual situation, what we see, we also have, let's say, the policy of sanctions, and we had recently also the decision of the US administration, let's say, to impose sanctions against 2 Russian oil companies. So we see this willingness on behalf of President Trump to find the solution. But again, it doesn't mean that we are sharing, let's say, the same perspectives. The war is going on, and as we see, it was recently Prime Minister Tusk, I think, mentioned that Zelensky had talked to him that Ukraine, let's say, can fight for another 3 years. Russians speak about the same. Let's hope that peace will come earlier than, let's say, these 3 years. But it seems there is readiness on both sides, be it Ukrainian and Russian at this moment, in general, to continue the war.
Okay, thanks. Elizabete, from where you are sitting, which side is more important in achieving just peace? Europe or still United States?
This is a very difficult question because, of course, the United States is an indispensable partner when it comes to an overall NATO-EU, this transatlantic space of values. So, of course, we cannot go ahead without them. And, of course, without just achieving a just peace as such, it's clear that these values we speak about, these procedures we have established in our own countries, like justice, accountability, they simply lose meaning. So there is both the practical and the values-based aspect to this debate. But overall, I think the Europeans are doing what they can. Mm-hmm. There are different mechanisms that have been established, like for instance, the AK group, the accountability group, which the United States used to chair. The EU is now trying to take a role in this in order to address the atrocity crimes in Ukraine. The United Kingdom is stepping up its role in this as well. So there are certain positive developments, and I believe that eventually, also based on the experience that we have in Europe after Balkan wars, we will come to some kind of a solution that will ensure that we don't continue with the violence, because that's the biggest threat if we don't reach just peace. Ongoing violence, trauma, suffering, these things have been documented in history books, so it is more than likely to come if we don't find a solution.
If we think about the day after, and if Ukrainians succeeds militarily, politically, one thing is, of course, we should think how we will resolve that issue and how we will get that just peace within Ukraine and among victims. But what kind of Europe then emerges? Because then we should think about concrete steps on integrating Ukraine with all the traumas coming from the war, politically and societal level. So how that might affect the unity, solidarity among European nations, counting in all the challenges that we already discussed in this discussion. What kind of Europe we will have after
to add something what also Elizabete mentioned, look at this moment, obviously Russia being the aggressor is a country which can stop the war at any moment. At this moment, there is feeling in Moscow that the war is developing according to their interests. So as a result, we must support Ukraine as long as possible. So it's only when there will be a feeling in Moscow that they cannot achieve, let's say, to call some kind of strategic aims. For example, simply saying they cannot capture additional territories, big cities. They cannot change the government in Kyiv. When this understanding will come, this will be the best guarantee. At this moment, Europeans and Americans and what we can do together, obviously supporting Ukraine. What happens next day? Elizabete mentioned already a bit about you will have thousands of soldiers at first coming home. I believe there will be growing realization about these sufferings which have taken place. Because at this moment, let's say we are counting, I believe on both sides. Ukrainians are counting how many Ukrainians have died, Russians are counting. Obviously, it will be growing realizations that probably these figures are much higher than probably expected. You have millions of Ukrainians who are staying at this moment in Europe, and obviously, let's be realistic, not all of them will return. Specifically, those who have left for further countries, maybe those who are in the Czech Republic, in Poland. These are Slavic populations there, so it's easier to return, integrate back. So you will have a huge social challenges. You will have reconstruction challenges because we see what's, let's say, how Donbas is looking like, be it Kramatorsk, Kharkiv, Zaporizhia, so you will need a lot of reconstruction. And this will be, and in addition, the political life will re-emerge. You definitely will have presidential elections. You will have parliamentary elections. So which means, let's say, you will have the rebirth of political parties, different type of politicians. So a lot of instability, political, social. And this is where the role of Europe will be extremely important. I would say in all possible fields. Social welfare, psychological welfare, reconstruction, physical. At the same time, not only physical, but also, let's say, rebuilding the education system, rebuilding social system. Without the support of the European Union, obviously Ukraine will not be able to sustain. And what Elizabete mentioned, though, I absolutely agree. The war ends. Even Ukraine gets just peace. As long as there will be feeling in Moscow, this is a part of so-called Ruski Mir, part, let's say, of this setting. Let's say what Russians have imagined, Belarus, Ukraine, let's say these three nations is one nation. Obviously, there will be always attempts to destabilize the situation. So as a result, coming back, without the huge assistance efforts from the European Union, Ukraine will not be able to cope itself with that.
Mm-hmm. Elizabete, you want to add something? What it will mean for Europe, Europe's unity, solidarity?
Thank you. So, I mean, I completely agree. I can only add, sounds like I just could continue agreeing with the ambassador.
I also agree.
So we don't have you see, but maybe it's good we have to agree on something. Ukraine is certainly one of them. So in general, the day after, it's quite clear that if things continue going in the direction that they're going now, Ukraine will be very deeply anchored in Europe's security architecture. And then, of course, that means that this is a certain signal to Russia, to Moscow, and to Kremlin. And I'm certain they will perceive this as an immediate danger for them, even for the future years, regardless of the negotiated deal that is achieved. So here, for instance, there are several threats that we must think about. For instance, if we think about reconstruction, the issue of critical infrastructure protection in Ukraine and the protecting of Ukrainians from Russian subversive influence operations is going to be one of the important priorities we will need to tackle alongside the reforms that they will need to put in place in anti-corruption, rule of law, protection of minorities, everything that the EU will ask for in order to eventually come to a pre-accession context. So we have this idea that war will end, but unfortunately the nature of war nowadays is such that most likely we will continue living in this gray area even after some kind of a peace deal or a ceasefire is achieved. And I think we have to really consider this because the veterans is one of the groups that will most likely be targeted with offers of earning easy money because they will face challenges of reintegrating in the labor market. We have to remember it's going to be over 1 million veterans that we're talking about, if not more. These are immense numbers, and Europe has never undertaken an operation of this scale. This will be our first. Okay. So having this all in mind, it's a difficult task, but we have to prepare. As long as we come in with a game plan, I think we can achieve success together.
Sure, thanks. Just I think we are limited in our time, but thinking about our foreign policy priorities, obviously Ukraine is the first one. It will be the first priority also for wider European Union. But then again, as you both mentioned, it all depends from Kremlin, from Russia, what Russia will do when Ukraine moves towards EU, what Russia will do when the Americans supply with more stronger military support. You at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, you have probably calculated what is the extent of what is the worst case escalation coming from Russia? What are your expectations, or what are you counting for what Russia should do, and how that might affect our stances on Ukraine?
Look, just signing ceasefire, I believe what I mentioned at the very beginning, just signing ceasefire without providing clear guarantees from Europe and the United States, this is the worst possible scenario. Then we get a situation, what Elizabete and me mentioned, million of people returning home, everything destroyed. So this is the worst case scenario. I would guess Europe will definitely be very much supportive to Ukraine after the end of the war. Where Europeans are good, this is always about reconstructing something, about rebuilding something. How Ukrainians will use the situation, this is a very big question, and Elizabete mentioned already that. Because knowing, let's say, the negative traditions, some, let's say, trends in the Ukrainian society, in the Ukrainian political elite, the key thing is not to waste this opportunity. Because, as I mentioned, Europe is very diverse, and the highest standards will be put for the protection of minorities, anti-corruption. So there will be no easy case scenarios. The key for Europeans will be to strengthen the Ukrainian statehood at the end of the day. The worst case scenario is that you have ceasefire, you don't have accession negotiations, you have countries supporting Ukraine, obviously there will be, but let's say we have more skeptical countries, you have more optimistic countries, you will need at the end of the day, as Elizabete mentioned, to mobilize all possible resources on behalf of the European Union. Because we will have some time when you can make change on the ground. If we assume that Russia has aggressive, we never know, maybe Russia changes. But if we assume that Russia has some aggressive designs, you must prepare Ukraine, the societies, the governments, the regions, the cities for possible next confrontation. And it's military here, security is only one part. It's also about really changing the society. It's about bringing Ukrainians to the European family of nations. Transforming in a way, and I would say, looking at Ukraine, it's huge transformation Ukrainians must go through when it comes to their mindset and everything. So we're coming back to this question: is, let's say, Ukrainians ready for Europe? Probably they have a feeling yes, but they do not grasp how complex is that.
And that was my final question, Elizabete, or two final questions: is Europe ready for Ukraine, and is Ukraine ready for the Europe? We conclude with the same that we started. Yeah.
So I think the ambassador answered the question. They think they are ready. There is an overwhelming societal agreement with the need to join the European Union. They see the benefit, but the issue is the work, and the work will take a lot of time. And I believe this is where we as Europeans lack in communication. We have to be very clear. There are no halfways. There are no partial participations in the European Union. There is only one way, and that way is through the negotiations. And it's not only symbolically accepting a law, it is also implementing it. And I believe this is where Ukraine is strongly lacking. And I say this with all my love and my dedication to this country for now over 10 years. There is a lot of work to do, and this indeed will take a lot of transformation of the minds, because just by looking at the European Values Survey, we see, yes, Ukrainians are more leaning towards individual duty. In some sense, they tend to trust government more and more with time. So there are certain trends that show, yes, the mindset is changing, but at the same time, they are still lagging in certain aspects of values and of sort of ways of doing things, which we would characterize as more European. And we, as Latvians, we know best, because when we started, did we know the challenges we're going to be facing? We probably could never imagine how difficult it would be. And we are still becoming Europeans. After all the time, after joining in 2004, we still have challenges. So our small example is a good example to them. But now we have to clearly communicate. It will take time. Brace yourselves, and we will stand by you. We will stand by you.
Thank you very much. Ambassador, anything to add?
I think, is Europe ready for Ukraine? I believe it's the same story. From my point of view, Europe is ready for Ukraine. But again, I believe it's extremely difficult to realize how difficult it will be also to integrate Ukraine. We nowadays see, let's say, that some neighboring states, you have, let's say, right-wing governments coming into neighboring states who are already expressing doubt. So obviously they understand probably Ukraine better than some farther neighbors. But I believe there is readiness for Ukraine, but it will require huge work from both sides.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Poikāns. Elizabete, thanks for joining. Dear audience, thanks for listening in. Many questions, many difficult questions, and a lot of questions where we still have no answer. But one is clear, that we should stand beside Ukraine. We should support Ukraine at its finest and final step towards the just peace. Glory to Ukraine. Thank you for watching and see you on the next episodes.